let's talk about the 100 Years' War. Now that name, it sounds so simple, right? 100 years, England versus France, one long epic showdown. But get this, what if it wasn't really about that at all? What if it was actually a giant messy family feud that spiraled completely out of control, and in the process ended up creating the very idea of England and France as we know them today?
So the first thing we have to tackle is that name. I mean, 100 years of nonstop fighting? Just thinking about it is exhausting. So was it really one single continuous war that dragged on for a century?
Well, the short answer? Nope, not even close. It was actually a whole series of really brutal conflicts, with long periods of peace and shaky truces in between. I guess the series of sporadic but related wars spanning over a century just didn't have the same ring to it, you know? But here's the key takeaway. This long, drawn-out struggle wasn't important just because it lasted a long time. It was important because it literally changed the DNA of both kingdoms forever.
So, where did all this chaos even come from? Well, it didn't start with some grand vision of nations clashing. It started with something much more personal. A really tangled-up royal family drama rooted in the web of claims to the throne and some seriously awkward political arrangements.
Okay, so at the very heart of the problem was the system called feudal vassalage. And you have to try and wrap your head around this. Imagine you're the King of England. You're a powerful sovereign ruler in your own land. But for all the huge wealthy territories you control over in France, like Aquitaine, you actually have to kneel down and swear loyalty to the King of France. So you're a king and also someone else's subordinate. It's a completely unstable setup, a political time bomb just ticking away.
And in 1328, that bomb finally went off. The French king dies, and he has no son to take his place. So who's the closest male relative? Believe it or not, it's the King of England, Edward III, through his mother. But the French nobles, they were not about to have an English king on their throne. So they basically said, no, mercy, and just picked a French cousin, Philip VI, instead. For a few years, things just simmered. But then, in 1337, Philip decided to confiscate Edward's French lands. And that was the final straw. Edward III fired back by declaring he was the rightful king of France, and boom, the war was on.
So you've got these two rival claims. On one side, Edward III is saying, hey, my bloodline is more direct through my mom. On the other side, the French are saying, sorry, the crown can't be passed down through a woman. But let's be real, this whole legal argument was just a cover story. Underneath it all, it was a massive power struggle. Edward wanted to keep his rich lands in France, and Philip wanted him out, once and for all, to create a truly unified French kingdom. Now, this war didn't just redraw the map of Europe. It completely tore up the rulebook on how wars were fought. Because the entire age of the chivalrous knight in shining armor, yeah, that was about to come to a very sudden and very violent end.
For hundreds and hundreds of years, medieval warfare was all about one image, the knight. This guy was basically the medieval version of a main battle tank. Covered head to toe in steel, riding a giant warhorse, he was the undisputed king of the battlefield.
But that total dominance, that whole military and social system built around the noble knight, was about to be completely shattered. And by what? A simple piece of wood and a string.
The absolute game changer was the English longbow. And this thing wasn't just a better weapon, it was a social revolution on the battlefield. It had incredible range, a crazy fast rate of fire, and at famous battles like Crecy and Agincourt, clouds of arrows from these longbows just mowed down wave after wave of France's finest knights. Now, just think about the implications of that. For the first time ever, a common peasant could kill a rich, powerful nobleman from 200 yards away. The whole feudal order was shaken to its core.
And just when everyone was starting to get used to the longbow, an even more disruptive technology started showing up on the battlefield, one that would make even the strongest stone fortresses totally obsolete.
I mean, sure, these early cannons were clunky, slow to load, and probably just as dangerous to the people firing them. But they could do one thing that changed everything. They could smash stone walls. Suddenly, castles that had been considered impenetrable for centuries could be blasted into rubble. Gunpowder meant the age of the castle was officially over.
Okay, this right here is arguably the most important legacy of the entire war, because beyond all the battles and the new weapons, this century of conflict acted like a giant forge. It took these two kingdoms, which were really just patchworks of feudal loyalties, and started hammering them into something new, something we'd recognize today: nations.
And what's so fascinating is you can see this happening on both sides at the same time. For England, when they finally lost their lands in France, it forced them to look inward, to start seeing themselves as a distinct island nation. And their new hero? It wasn't some king. It was the humble longbowman who could beat the French nobles. Meanwhile, in France, having your homeland invaded for decades created this powerful sense of shared resistance, perfectly captured by the incredible figure of Joan of Arc. In both places, people slowly stopped thinking of themselves as just subjects of some local lord and started thinking of themselves as English or French.
So how did that happen? Well, a huge part of building an identity is figuring out who you aren't. To become us, you need a them. And both sides got really good at this. Through stories, propaganda, and songs, the enemy was painted as this evil other. By constantly defining themselves against each other, both kingdoms accidentally built up a powerful sense of their own unique identity. So after more than a century of bloodshed, technological disruption, and identity building, what are we left with? When all the dust settles, what is the ultimate legacy of this long, messy war? Why does a medieval family spat still matter to us today?
It really all boils down to three huge transformations. Politically, it completely severed that weird, awkward feudal bond and set England and France on their own separate paths to becoming the sovereign nations we see today. Militarily, it knocked the knight off his pedestal and kicked off a new age of warfare dominated by infantry and firepower. And maybe most importantly, in the minds of the people, it planted the very first seeds of national consciousness that would shape the next 500 years of history.
Which kind of leaves us with a big question, right? If a century-long war forged two of the most powerful nations on Earth, what common causes or common enemies are shaping our own collective identities today? It's definitely something to think about.